What do you make of the current stage of investigation against this young man, Mr. Rahami, so far?
I think that all law enforcement agencies in New York, New Jersey, and federal have done a spectacular job. I mean, I think it's the quickest we've ever seen someone taken into custody after a bombing anywhere in the world. So when you have a bombing such as what happened Saturday night in New York City on a crowded street in the Chelsea section, Midtown Manhattan, that happens at 8:30. Police find another bomb unexploded about 4 blocks away, and then tie it together with an earlier bombing in New Jersey and later attempted bombings on at a train station in New Jersey, and bring this person to custody in 50 hours. It's incredible.
Right. How much does this have to do with the kinds of trainings and also apparatus when it comes to anti-terrorism security measures implemented in New York City after September 11th?
Well, all over the world, law enforcement agencies are getting better at not only detecting it, the intelligence that surrounds it, but also determining from the forensics, from the actual bomb fragments, and in the unexploded device that was found on 27th Street, the fingerprint and characteristics on the cell phone that led back to Radani.
And also, Mr. Ruskin, when we talk about speed, it should be congratulated to the New York police. However, on the other hand, people would also wonder about the accuracy if the investigation can be so speedy. What do you make of it?
Well, I think that what we're learning from this investigation, it appears that the FBI may have had knowledge of it 2 years in advance. I think we have to look at that and see if there were any warning signs that maybe a further investigation should have taken. The good news here is no one was hurt in any of the 2 bombs that exploded, or the bomb that the police were trying to defuse at the time it exploded. But what the good news here is, police were able to take the evidence and take the forensics and lead it back to the person responsible for this and bring him into custody. And thank God for the Linden police officers who were involved in the shootout with him, who were injured and shot, and thank God they're okay.
Right. Of course, blessings to the police that have been working very hard around the clock in New York City, and also for the safety around the world. Having said that, though, let me ask you, Mr. Ruskin, final question to you individually, which is, what do you make of the reporting so far that this young man was being reported 2 years ago, some suggested by his father, of quote-unquote possible terrorist? After some investigation, further inquiry did not go anymore. The police ended it there, suggesting there were no evidence. And 2 years later, something like this happened. How should we understand all of these together?
Well, I think we all have to understand that police and FBI are federal partners who investigate crimes in our country, throughout our country, had information supposedly from the father. Supposedly from news reports, we're learning now that the father recanted his statements at a later date. The FBI opens a case file and has a certain period of time to either continue that case file and recommend the case file remain open, or close the investigation. In this case, not finding any other evidence that determined that this man may have become radicalized and or was a threat to anyone in this country, they closed their case. That's something that government officials as well as law enforcement officials are going to have to look at in the future to determine if there's anything better we can do.
All right. Thomas Ruskin, former New York City police detective investigator. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us. Really appreciate it. And then let's come to our discussion. Thank you, sir. With the other 2 gentlemen waiting in the studio for us, Mr. Yang Mingjie and also Mr. Jim Walsh. First of all, Mr. Walsh, what do you make of the current stages of the investigation, particularly of the fact that, Mr. Walsh, that we have seen, if we could have Mr. Walsh on the big screen, yes. Mr. Walsh, particularly we have seen some further questioning and now seem going into legal process of this case. A lawyer likely to represent Mr. Rahami in the court, but not necessarily representing him, but rather to inform him of what's going on in the court. So what's the next step, and how do you think this case is helping us to understand the U.S. capabilities of anti-terrorism since September 11th?
All right, well, let's take each question in turn. First, on the legal process, as of today, federal authorities have charged him with a variety of crimes. They are hoping to expedite to quickly move into court proceedings. If he is physically unable to appear in court because of his injuries from the shootout, they're even talking about doing it by video or by phone. So I think you're going to see quick movement on this. When he was captured, they captured a notebook with him that was very specific in the steps he was taking prior to those attacks, as well as looking at his YouTube channel and other information, have acquired quite a lot of information that suggests his culpability. So I expect that they're going to want to move as quickly as possible on this. As far as what it implies about larger trends in counterterrorism, you know, I think it's very hard to generalize off of one incident. In this case, it works both ways. We got very, very lucky. The real reason why we were able to catch him, as the other gentleman suggested, in such a short period of time, is that one of the bombs did not go off. So they were able to get that bomb, and what did they do? They found fingerprints on it, and they saw the cell phone, and they saw the construction of the bomb and how it was similar to other bombs that had occurred elsewhere. So we really got lucky here in that regard. But there's a sort of systemic issue that you can't really blame the police for. If the FBI opens up an assessment, which is what happened in 2014, and so what does the FBI do? They look on their database. He's not on the database. They interview people. No one says anything. It's hard to catch people who, when their crime that they commit is the first time they commit a crime. You know, if you look in the record and there isn't any evidence in the historical record of them committing a crime, you can't sort of keep the case open forever.
Mr. Walsh,
and so I think that's an issue.
Yeah, and Mr. Walsh,
Yes.
if I can continue ask you a little bit before you go, that is,
Sure.
What is the root cause, do you think, for this gentleman? Of course, we don't have much information still, but we have some. For this young man, Mr. Rahami, to do what he did, at least accused of doing, was it because he was originally coming from Afghanistan? Was it because he later became a naturalized American citizen? Was it because he traveled to Pakistan and Afghanistan as a young man? Was it because he brought back a wife from Pakistan? Or is it because that he, together with other young men in America, or women, now have also been receiving these Islamic extremist propaganda and therefore convert themselves to something that is extremely radical?
Yeah, I think we ought to be really, really careful about drawing causal inferences off one case for which we have very little information. And so we don't know, does this person have a mental health issue? Are there other issues? We just don't know. And let me say, causality, you've got to be very careful when you're dealing with outliers. And that's what we're dealing with here. Most people who come to the United States from Afghanistan do not commit terror acts. Most young men do not commit acts of terrorism. These people are the tiny, tiny fraction, the exception to the rule. So it's not really a great process to then try to make generalizations of people who are inherently an exception rather than something that happens a lot. Most terrorism happens, 80% of all terrorism happens in 5 countries, not, in Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, and elsewhere, not the United States. In the West, more attacks are conducted by people who are right-wing nationalists than people who have views related to Islamic extremism. So we want to be very careful here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Walsh, for being with us from MIT Securities Program. Thank you. Now let me come to you, Mr. Yang.
Thank you.
Further quick questions for you. One is, should we worry more about homegrown terrorism in countries, whether developed or developing economies, or should we worry more about certain areas and certain religions? But just now you also heard from the Chinese Premier speaking in the UN General Assembly not to do this profiling, blindly linking areas, countries, cultures, religion to terrorism.
I think that the homegrown terrorism has become a very serious threat to all of the countries in the world, especially in West countries, because after September 11th, we know that the network of jihad, the extremist jihad, is experience some kind of proliferation period, which means they don't want to make that war in some countries, but they want to find some homegrown young terrorism in some countries. But we can see from the history that from 2008 to this year, the number of the homegrown terrorism plot is increasing. So that is a threat for us. Yeah.
And before we go, my final question for you, what would this say about the international coordination of efforts against terrorism? Is this case in New York going to be a big warning for everyone around the world, including for China?
For me, I think we can do a lot of coordination on counterterrorism issues, but the urgent for us is how could we make a joint effort to block the propaganda of the radicalism or terrorism ideologies. For example, like some report by FBI that there are about 15,000 radical, they use the word radical website.
15,000?
Yeah, and almost 8% is in the server of the United States.
8 or 80%?
80%.
I see,
So
80%.
Yes, that means the United States has, I think, its responsibilities to make a coordination with other countries